Hello and
Right.
welcome to the Noroff unofficial podcast. We are recording the third episode of the Noroff podcast for the Interactive Media Games department. My name is Thirsty. This is my co-host Marcus. Are you there, Marcus?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
And this week is the guest, Dr. Filipe Pais. Welcome. Tell us who you are, where you are, and where do you come from, and what do you do?
So thank you very much for this invitation. It's really a pleasure, and I would like to also congratulate you for the initiative. It's really interesting to have this opportunity um, because simply some of you don't actually know a lot about myself, and it's not only about myself. It's also about other teachers. So it's really wonderful that you're doing this because even for colleagues, I think it will be quite interesting that we hear this podcast to learn about our colleagues. Yeah, so it's really an amazing idea. So about your question, um, well, first of all, as you said, Filipe Pais. Philippe, it's written with a Filipe, and first of all, I come from Portugal, and I currently live in London, but I don't consider myself as a Londoner, even if I live here since now 5 years. Um, it's a very strange relation I have with this city because I spend my time traveling in different countries with different institutions and universities I'm attached to. So it's a very strange time, and this continues our previous conversation because I keep just seeing myself jumping into trains and planes to go to places. So at the moment, well, I'm attached to a university as well here in London. So it's a kind of um, a way to justify my life in this city because I need to be attached to it somehow, professionally speaking. So I'm currently teaching at LCC, which stands for London College of Communication, and this is a college part of the University of Arts of London, which is a big institution. And I teach students at the MA for Interaction Design. So this is a kind of a side job. My main job is still with Noroff University, so where you are located. Not you, Trossi, I believe, but you know this place better than myself, I believe, in a certain way. But I teach, as you know, at distance. But from time to time, I go and I provide this kind of immersive courses on site, on campus. So what happens, with me is I'm still.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to get to meet you on the podcast here because we've researched so much about you. Like we didn't know there was so much to research, and then we started checking out your name, and there were so many links attached to your name, and we were like, what is going on here? We see that you've been lecturing all over the place for many years.
Yeah.
But we haven't gotten enough research on you yet. There's so much to read. You've written a book. You've been a lecturer, a bunch of stuff, right? So
Like
considering that, yeah.
Like your LinkedIn page is like full of experience, like from what 2008 to 2006 or something you started working and like filled it up. So your profile is like huge.
Is it? I was under the impression my profile with LinkedIn was completely useless. I actually just a few days ago because I've been asked as friend. I had this passage in Brazil, and in Brazil, LinkedIn is a big thing. So I felt just like my LinkedIn doesn't make any sense. I need to at least put a little bit of information, the basics. My attachment to institutions, to university, at least needs to be there. Otherwise, it will just confuse people.
So, like in all honesty, like we were mentioning before, our knowledge comes from stories and experience during classes. But with you, it's complete polar opposites. We barely hear of your past work, and mostly just see what you know through the classes we take with you. Yeah, and not like. Let's start with your PhD, just for a starting point. Like, what led you to get your PhD? How are you, Dr. Filipe?
Well, as it always sounds strange hearing Dr. Philippe, but it's been a while now. It's almost 10 years since I got my PhD. So I had a time to get used to that. I would say that what led me to my PhD is essentially curiosity, which I think is central. In the best things you do are triggered by curiosity, by a free will of just going there, right? It's a little bit like when we play. You heard about this for a while with using it, but I keep thinking that this is the best motivation, is when you're curious, when you have some kind of free will, that a kind of force that pushes you into that. And obviously, a PhD is essentially a kind of a starting point for you to start a kind of research. Yeah, because before you actually able to do proper research, you need you need that title, obviously, but you need also an introduction to that research. You need the time. You need the conditions. You need time and space to really get deeper into a subject. And this is what I was basically in need for. I needed time. I needed to find the conditions. And normally, a PhD, if you're lucky, comes with finance, right? So with a self-funding. Not self-funding, sorry, you might want to cut this part, with funding, external funding, that allows you to just dedicate your time to do that kind of research. And this is extremely interesting, and it's one of the things that might actually impact all your career, because when you're giving that time, it's quite a privilege. So what you might need to know is that before I started my PhD, I was actually working with the industry. I was working in a company which was doing interaction design and interactive advertisements. Okay, and by that time, I was already doing some kind of artistic experimentation that was coming from my degree. I actually got a degree in sound and image, which was another name for multimedia or interaction design. Well, let's call it multimedia design. And by that time, I was really interested in how interaction is actually able to provide new aesthetic questions. How can we experience art by interacting and by affecting the content of a piece, for example, opposed to our normal relationship with the painting? Or you can observe the painting, and there is obviously always an interaction. You go around, you get closer, you explore with more or less attention, but you cannot immediately change how that painting looks like, right? You don't have a direct physical impact. So I was really interested in a breadth of work that was really trying to bring this possibility. How with our movement, with our touch, with our voice, we can change the outcome of that painting or of that sound work, for example. So I decided to just stop working because obviously I was very interested in this advertisements where we could impact something. Our movement, for example, you could change the text, you could change the colors of a certain space, obviously always concerned with this idea of how to engage the consumer. So there was an ethical perspective that I was not very comfortable with, but at the same time I was just thinking, well, this is where we are headed. We are having more and more objects we can interact with in the field of art, in the field of advertisement, in the field of marketing. So let's try to understand this from a more scientific perspective, from a phenomenological perspective, from an aesthetic perspective. What is actually happening in here? What kind of experiences these artists, these designers are providing? So that PhD comes from there, actually. And actually, my thesis was called Experience and Meaning Making Process in Interactive Arts, the Influence of Play and Aesthetic Distance in Interactive Art Encounters. A long name, slightly repetitive, which I regret a little bit, but that brings you an image on what I was trying to explore during my thesis.
Yeah. I mean, I've always thought that, getting a PhD is kind of about not necessarily being really motivated, like you're telling me, but I've always imagined that it's people that think that it's their duty to get a higher rank in some sense. You know what I mean? And me as a student, I've always been kind of adverse to school stuff and putting work into things I don't care about. And it was first when I found games that I was really engrossed with making the games. I'm like, I want to put in time here. But having a doctor here at Noroff as a teacher is quite a gift. I mean, we already have another doctor as well, Dr. Eric Gessling. But I didn't even know you were a doctor until at least the second year, because I didn't know you had the title. I was like, whoa, you leave a lot kind of for us to get to know you during the classes. And I think it's interesting to see why you became a teacher here at Noroff. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. So first of all, I think talking a little bit about my academic engagement with universities and other institutions might also explain the path a little bit. So I first discovered my interest about teaching as just an outgoing student. I made my degree in sound and image, and I had a good relationship with teachers. They saw the outcome of my path as a successful thing. I made 2 installations which were awarded and got the public attention in Portugal. And I was this student in a small town near the capital, Lisbon. That place is called Caldas da Rainha and has a very interesting art school called ESAD. So it's a school for arts and design, which is in the middle of a wood, and it's a well-renowned school. And by that time, they asked me, well, would you be interested in teaching with us? I was just involved in the industry at the same time, and they saw, well, there's a potential here to transfer some of your knowledge. You develop some of the things, and what was interesting is that my colleagues were essentially interested in creating audiovisual content, like for TV and cinema, and some of them, as you know, with this willingness to become sound engineerings and to become musicians with a better, a more substantial background in sound. And I was actually using code and programming some, simple algorithms to, kind of create this generative installations where, for example, I was using real fishes in an aquarium to produce soundscapes, immersive soundscapes, or to create this kind of visual organisms. I would call it organism because it looked like something organic. It looked like actually fungi or a kind of plankton. I was calling it living room plankton because it was this kind of organism that would grow in a wall, influenced by different kind of conditions, temperature of the room, humidity, and the sound in the room as well. So obviously, I tried to translate this into transferable knowledge, and I was teaching there for 1 year before I started my PhD. Because then I said to myself, it's time to actually go deeper and understand what I'm doing actually, because I was not fully convinced. I was this person who was able to do things experimentally and learn things on my own, but I was I needed to go deeper. That's the thing.
May I ask, how old were you then? Were you when you like finished your bachelor or like your first degree, and then went on to do your PhD work, research? How old were you?
Yeah, I was 23 when I finished my bachelor's. Yeah, 23, and then I started working with the industry during 2 years, more or less. And and then at the same time teaching, and then I started a PhD at 26, I would say. So coming back to your question, so I decided to accept this position. Then I started the PhD, and during the PhD, it became very clear that the question of play was very important. So play as something that we basically do to have fun, because we choose, and this was something that we were observing a lot in this kind of interactive installations. Very often artists were asking people to play in gallery spaces, in museums, where they normally would just be asked to stare at paintings or sculptures and do not touch. So there was this kind of strange inversion where we were finally asking people to touch the artworks, to get more involved with them, and that was really fascinating for me. So I began to study all these theorists. Some of them you already know, Huizinga, for example, Jan Bogost, and those references I was passing to you, they actually come from my thesis. Those were things I studied during my thesis, and later on, when I finalized my thesis in Paris, I was a student researcher in the program, and then I would become a postdoc as well. And when I got this opportunity for the postdoc, which is something that you do after your PhD, so it's another opportunity that you get to do something a little bit shorter, because a PhD normally takes 3 to 5 years. Well, some people take 10. It's not very unusual. to take more time than the 3 or 5 standard years. So my postdoc was about play as well, but about behaving and misbehaving objects. And when I'm talking about objects, I'm talking about tangible objects like this bottle of water. How could we use objects from our daily lives and give them behaviors and give them a kind of personality through robotics? So there was a connection somehow with my thesis, with the aspect of interaction and with the aspect of play as well. And then my PhD supervisor was actually a teacher at Noroff by the time, and she was about to leave NUC when there was also a possibility to teach there. So I just thought, well, play and games are something that I don't master completely this domain, especially when it comes to video games, because obviously I always played video games since I'm a teenager, since at least 14 or even before 13 years old. I always had consoles, and I had all the things that a teenager from that period of time should have. Master System, Nintendo, all the things. And I thought, well, I would like to take this opportunity to go deeper and to go back to my period of adolescence, and to go deeper on that knowledge I got from there, and to use those experiences and to gather with the scientific methods I gained from my PhD. So that is actually when I saw really this as a possibility to teach in an interactive media program, which was more connected with games. Because obviously there's the animation part, which I don't master at all. And obviously I'm always learning from students, but still it's more, most of you know much more about it than myself. But so this is when I got this opportunity. I started by really linking play and art at first when I arrived at NUC, and I was also teaching interaction design, which is a course you will find next year, and I was teaching studio basically. So as you know, studio is always about project follow-up. So it's quite open. And then interaction design, it's a course where you go through the principles of interaction. It's theory, but it's also practice-based, where you need to be better at developing your graphic user interfaces and stuff like that. I think this gives you an idea of how I was actually brought to NUC, and I'm still there.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a long journey. It feels like you're taking us with you. You're teaching in interaction design in London, and then you're teaching interactive games or interactive media in Norway at Noroff. So I'm just thinking, like, obviously, London is a different place here, but in Noroff, you're teaching, a few courses. You're obviously with studio, but what courses are you teaching here at Noroff, and like, what's your teaching philosophy and ideology?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Philosophy and ideology. It's a long discussion as well, but I think there's a you were talking about London and Noroff. Obviously, we might think, well, games and interaction design it's obviously games are very, very specific, or more specific at least than interaction design, which is this kind of huge, foggy discipline. But they share a lot of things. They share a lot of common principles and theories, and therefore, it makes perfect sense that I bring information from one side to the other. So I learn a lot with the game side, with the play side, even with students that I bring to London College of Communication, and the other way around too. And you see, so I'm currently my main course is actually ludic studies. So as you know, this course is about the culture surrounding games, the culture of games, but also the culture surrounding games, and it starts with a very simple question: why do we play? What is play? And things like that. So we try to bring a lot of views from Muzinga to Kaiwa, and also then it starts to become a little bit more complex when we start analyzing how games transform society, how games transform human relationships, and human functioning as well. We talk about stereotypes, we talk about ethics and moral principles in games. We talk about serious play, and as you know, for example, this year you had the chance to develop a kind of an idea, a game concept around the idea of social credit score in China. So it's a game that it's a course that is about games, but it's about many other things, and it's a reading from different disciplines as well. It brings anthropology, it brings sociology, philosophy, but also aesthetics and psychology. So it's the main course today. Then I also contribute to the course of interaction design, where, as I said previously, we will analyze what are the main principles of interaction design. What do you need to look for when you're designing a graphic user interface? What kind of methodologies are there to make user testing? User testing is very, very important when you design stuff, right? Because you design things for someone, even if it's for a dog. You need to make a user test with the dog, right? Or with several dogs. So in interaction design, this is essentially what I teach, and I think it's a course that normally comes a little bit late. So things are getting a little bit restructured, but yeah, so far this is the main two courses, and then I contribute in different studios, and this contribution is more about just having this classical follow-up with students, with different groups, sometimes one-to-one. What's that?
Yeah, you give students great feedback and all that as well.
Yeah, it's about really just giving them feedback. It's about also bringing the right questions, and yeah, that's it. It's a lot of follow up. It's not technical. So as you understand, my intervention in the interactive media program is not very technical. At first, it was a little bit more. I started by introducing some kind of visual programming in courses, but then I decided that we need to actually focus more on what is important for me, at least at this period in time.
You have one colleague with you that helps the students with the technical aspect of studio, right?
Absolutely. So this is another thing I like in NUC, is that there is a kind of a balance. There is you have teachers who have clearly a more theoretical, more conceptual interest and background, but then you have a lot of other teachers who are very well equipped with technical skills and who are involved also in practical projects with industry as well. So it's a nice balance, I would say. But in terms of the ideology, in terms of the philosophy, Marcus was asking, I keep thinking that we live in this time, which is very particular. Well, at least in Europe, we expect people to work a lot. Well, in Europe, in the Occidental world, in the Western world, I would say, we expect people to work a lot, to produce many things, and to quickly learn new things and skills. So you have to adapt quickly. You have to sometimes just switch your hat and put another one to do another project. And as I see it, this is actually leaving us with little time to deeply think about the impact of our actions, to understand the fast-paced world which is around us, right? So in a way, there is a kind of an alienation by the speed of things, right? So I keep thinking that as a teacher, I need to give the tools and the time and space for students to have some kind of critical thinking. Yeah, because at the end of the day, and as I could see myself as a student, I was learning different skills, different methods, different tools, which today are completely outdated. In a matter of 15 years or even 20 years. So technique evolves very fast. What is relevant today in 5 years might not be, as you know. So I believe that what is really important today is that you develop a critical thinking, critical thought that is solid, that can be adaptable to any situations where you will be situated. And with ludic studies, for instance, I try to give that space for freedom. Obviously, you might say, well, but we still need to read Huizinga. Yes, you need to read Huizinga, but it's not a dogma. It's not something that is, it's not the church. It's not the mass. You use these voices at your own will. You are able to, and the best assignments are those who are really strongly criticizing the views with good arguments, with solid arguments. I don't want you to be agreeing with everything these people have said. They are just tools, to ignite, to trigger thinking, and therefore, this is why in most of the assignments you are asked to read and to kind of connect with these views, but also to bring yours and to bring your own experiences. Yeah, that's why I give a lot of space to that, because you realizing what experiences you went through is a great thing, and having the time for that is extremely precious, because we live in this time where we are bombarded by information from YouTube, from Wikipedia, from ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is now, writing entire essays. So you see what I mean? It's like we need to develop this. This is my philosophy. And another thing is always teach what you would like to be taught. Yeah, that's also a very important part, because I don't teach things I would say, well, I would hate to have this, to spend time doing this. Okay.
I think
hope that
if I could add to your from another perspective, with being with you in class, the one thing I really like about you as a teacher is you have helped me with putting my thoughts on a paper, like in ludic studies when we are reading and trying to put our philosophies on a paper and how we think about games and art and play and all that. I think you help us really well to understand our learning curve as a designers by helping us reflect on our work and giving us feedback to notice our problems and to attack our you help us to pinpoint the problems we don't see, right? So I think your like calm and a friendly approach of like pinpointing problems and like obstacles along the educational journey, I think you help us, yeah, basically to reflect and realize our general learning curve, which is really helpful and lessen the stress and the anxiety we get as students for like you said, being bombarded by all this new philosophy and a philosophy for like ChatGPT and TikTok and YouTube and all of the things going around us. Sometimes we don't just need to have a conversation with an individual like yourself as a teacher to reflect what we are thinking, right? So I want to add that to your like ideology, which I really like personally.
Thank you very much. That's that's always very good to hear. It's some students they obviously get it at the end of the course, and some will take a little bit more time to process, and they will see the usefulness of that, because at the end of the day, if we are in the field, if we
Mm-hmm.
are even teachers,
Yeah.
and if we don't know basic things like what is play, why do we play, why do we
Mm-hmm.
keep playing, those are very, very basic questions, and some
Yeah,
students
really.
they just react very negatively to them and thinking like, why are you asking us so basic questions? They have no interest. We won't learn anything from answering these questions. I mean, I had a few reactions in the past, but at the end of the day, I think they will end up understanding why they are being asked such basic things,
I think
because that time you need, it's that space, and academia and school is still a protected space that gives you that time that you won't have when you reach professional life. Believe me, you won't have that time. It will
I
be
think it's
rare, or you're very lucky.
I think it's really interesting. Like in ludic studies or in like studio, for example, like with you and Diego. I think you guys really help us students to think, like help us to think by ourselves for and realize that curiosity that the why we are doing this, right? Like in some schools, we attend to math classes and arts and like we do projects, but why are we doing them? Because like you help us to like realize is we are doing this because we like games, we like the art, philosophy, the questions, the interactive like element of creating games, the world building, everything. And sometimes it's good to step back and like ask the simple question, why do we play? Why do we like to create something that is going to like make that thing feel great and like have a nice experience? How do we create these emotions, right? And yeah, it's just a fantastic thing that you're doing at Noroff. I would like to ask, if we step it back for a bit, like you have been a teacher at, like you mentioned, Portugal, right? You have been like in France, you live in London, you are like teaching in Norway. Could we call you the nomad teacher? Like you're like everywhere, every time? Like,
I think indeed you can. It's something that I keep thinking. Well, when is this going to stop? Or do I want it to stop? Or
it's a
what
really
is the?
interesting life. Yeah, like a
It
really.
is. It is. It is really interesting, and I tend to call myself a pollinator, like a bee, just bringing pollen from one side to the other, and creating a kind of life with that.
Mhm.
it's a metaphor, obviously, but this is what I try to do, and I'm really happy in that position. I'm really also happy being in a field such as interaction design, because this field allows you to create bridges between disciplines that may be disconnected. So obviously, sometimes the problem is when you are in so many places, it takes you a lot of energy to start with, because the fact that you're traveling, the fact that you are encountering new people, encountering students that you need to eventually know their names. It would be good. This is obviously very rich, because you see different ways of thinking, you see different ways of acting in the world. Even Norwegian students are very different from students in France, or from students here in London. And this is extremely interesting, even in terms of a pedagogical project, and how you build something that is coherent and well adapted to the location. It brings a lot of reflections. So yeah, nomad is another good label for me.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm kind of like curious about, because teachers usually have a lot going on. I hear a lot about how Joshua worked on some weird medical project with his 3D skills, which was like, what? You can work in that? I'm kind of wondering, like, what kind of weird special projects have you worked on? I mean, I saw some of your art, or at least the art that you've curated. So I was like, whoa, that's kind of nuanced. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So again, as I said, being in the field of arts and interaction design allows you to connect very different knowledges from different disciplines. And obviously, society today, and other comment on society and what society expects from us. Well, when I say society, might sound a little bit too broad, but institutions, they expect you to specialize in a specific field, obviously. With we could call Marcus, because he's extremely good at developing AI in video games, and he's the king of NPCs. So we want to put labels on people. So I think I have a problem with that. And obviously, at the end of the day, when you analyze my CV and the things I've been doing, they seem disconnected. But obviously, I always see a guiding line, a red thread between the different projects. But I could think about the advertisement projects I work with in the industry. And this is probably where my knowledge on interaction and for example, on certain methodologies I've learned about observing people and how they interact with this works, which later I would apply in my PhD research, comes from there, from developing this advertisings which are interactive, which are extremely commercial. We're working for people such as Coca-Cola, for example, and and at the end of the day, what I learned is a lot about human experience, about phenomenology, and how people are triggered by certain cues that allow to play, and immediately when you're able to play, you feel kind of engaged with an object or with a situation. So I think those projects, even if they were not mine personally, they were corporate projects. I was working for a big company in Lisbon called Y Dreams. And I still see them as important things that influence the way I see things today, and also, the way I design today as well, and the way I teach today. So everything is connected. But I could talk about another project that has nothing to do, apparently, with the question of play and games.
Yeah.
But it has, in fact. During my postdoc in 2015 at ENSAD in Paris, as I said previously, I was searching on how objects can have a kind of behavior when they are animated. So, for example, how a chair, through the movement, through physical movement, and here we're not talking about a chair on a screen. We are talking about a real chair, a tangible object moving around space. And for example, if a chair is moving away from a person through the movement, we could say that that chair might be or shy, or the chair is scared, so the chair is moving away, or the chair is misbehaving because it refuses to be picked up by a person, right? So it's what we call today behavioral objects. It's this class, this category of objects that express themselves through movement, and they can express a behavior, a misbehavior, or they can express a kind of a personality. Yeah. What is a shy chair? How would you prototype that? And I was working with a team of students by that time, and specialists like in cognitive science. And we were wondering, well, we detected a lot of these objects through the history of art and the history of design. There is a long tradition, yeah? And there is a huge aspect of humor, because sometimes you have a CCTV camera, for example, is one of the artworks we were studying. It's called insecurity camera, and in fact, you have this classical CCTV camera, which instead of tracking people, when it detects a face, instead of moving and following that person, it would do exactly the opposite. So it would steer away. It would just move away, like refusing to actually accept this order from the programmer, from the developer. And we could also see a kind of personality. We could say, well, that like a shy person who is not able to look into someone else's eyes, right? We could see, eventually that this camera would be kind of insecure, or could have been, showing a kind of shyness, right? So we were asking ourselves, well, despite the quantity of interesting objects that fall under this category, we need to find a way of giving the right tools for students and for artists and designers to be able to create more of this. Because we also want to understand by practice, by doing practical research. We want to study what these objects can be and what is the potential behind them. So we developed a robotic kit, which is called MISBE kit, and MISBE stands for misbehavior. And this is a very, it's like a Lego, high definition Lego, where all the pieces, the structural pieces and the motors and the microcontrollers, everything is enwrapped by Velcro, by Scratch. So all the pieces come together, and you can scratch them together, and very quickly, sometimes in a matter of 5 minutes, you can build a behavioral object that you will then operate with a software, custom-made software. You will animate that object. So all this to tell you that this kit became quite quite interesting at the end of the day, and it showed it was really an interesting prototyping tool. So we made more than 60 workshops around the world in different universities and schools. We had actually a workshop some years ago in 2017 or something like that. And you see, you were not there, obviously. And what we saw during these workshops is the kind of humor and the kind of free play that rises from just building this kind of robotic objects that are very basic, that very often misbehave and don't behave according to your expectations. But this becomes a kind of a tool, a toy at a certain point, a toy for social interaction. I just came from Brazil, and in Itaú Cultural, it's a foundation for arts. We used the kit to actually make team building, because they were forming a new team in a media lab, and basically we used the kit to bring people together and to play with the kit. So actually, we can call it a toy. So what I was developing with my team at NSAD was actually, at the end of the day, a prototyping tool, which ends up being a toy. Yeah. So you see that play is, again, even if I'm talking about robotics, if I'm talking about a kind of object that we don't normally work with at NUC, because or you work with animation or you work with video games, very rarely with traditional games, so with tangible objects. But again, we find play here again. And the last project I would like to talk about is called Play Mode. This is also related with Brazil, because the last show was actually finishing very a couple of weeks ago in April in Brasilia. And Play Mode is an exhibition, collective show, which brings together very different artworks, but there is a common line, a common thread, which is the notion of play. All these artworks are playful, or when they are not playful, when you cannot play with them, they talk, or they make reference to play, or to the influence of play, or to the impact of play in society. So, for instance, in one of the sections, because you have 3 main sections in this exhibition. This is an exhibition with more than 30 artworks together. And in one of the sections, you find essentially video games that are socially or politically engaged. So, for example, you'd find Phone Story, which is a game I showed in Ludic Studies, which is this very simple game for iPhone or Android, where the creators show how the production process of smartphones is handled. And you're playing, for example, in you take part of the mining process in Congo, and you play as a soldier, for example, whose mission is to keep children working, and obviously this is a terrible action, because you are in this position where you should play as the oppressor, right? And it's morally interesting as a game,
But
because
reality, right? It's close to
it's
reality.
yes, I mean, it's actually, it was reality. Now things are getting better, because this situation got a lot of attention. and this has been ongoing for a lot of years. So hopefully the situation is not anymore. But we know that there is a lot of forced labor connected with mining and with the production of technology. So this is a real question. So this was just an example to show you how controversial these games in the exhibition were, and obviously some people had strong reactions to them, even complaining. But this is what reality is. So you should just make it more visible, so things eventually change. And I think play mode was really about this, about showing how games have today a huge potential to reach very different publics and to convey different meanings and messages across the border. And again, this was the goal, like how to bring video games into a gallery space, into a museum, which normally they were not part of them, right? People always reacted to, well, this is just entertainment. This is just these are just games and light entertainment. No, it's not. Video games are extremely complex. There are so many things ongoing, and clearly they belong to the museum as well, as alongside with many other artworks. So this play mode was a statement. It was a manifesto about that as well.
Yeah,
I hope that provides three different perspectives. I could speak about many other projects, but I think the time is limited. Yeah.
Are you working on? I think you mentioned it in one of your classes. You're working on a project or a nature project with Dr. Eirik, right?
Yes.
How is that? Do you have small pitches? Small.
Yeah. So basically, with Eric Geslin, we built a research group inside the IM department called the CNAP. And CNAP stands for Center for Non-Anthropocentric Play. Non-anthropocentric play, right? I repeat because it's a hard one. And this is really about acknowledging that most games we have developed so far are always with humans at the center, which it's not something strange. It seems obvious. We design essentially for humans, even if we can design games and toys for animals as well, of course. But it has been too much, I would say. There is an obsession by this anthropocentrism. Humans are always at the center, and we are living in a planet in decline, which is breaking apart. And as many theoreticians and game designers already acknowledged, we are not the first ones to see the problem. This derived from a huge variety of readings and conversations with other people. Games have the power also to switch perspectives, right?
Yeah.
And to change the social imaginaries, as Eric likes to say. So again, this project is really about starting to create environments, game environments and game ideas, game concepts that bring the non-anthropocentric, which is everything else than humans, to games. So when you think about games such as Stray or Endling, even the game Everything, which I keep repeating, they change perspective, because actually you are controlling an avatar that is non-human, and just that, even if sometimes it's a little bit more naive than other times. Just that is changing something. Obviously, we always saw that in video games, but it's a minority when compared with you controlling a human avatar. So the question is for our group, how can we bring more information and context, and how can we also transform the views by bringing this non-anthropocentric view? What can we learn from that? Because we are always learning from games. When we play, some are more narrative driven than others, but we are always learning something. Sometimes we don't even notice, but we learn something. So how can we bring nature? Well, and here it seems I'm making this split, which is a terrible mistake. Humans and nature are the same thing, right? But the nature that is non-human, how can we bring it to games, right?
Sometimes, like, humans try to differentiate them from nature, right? Try to put them above other animals sometimes, and above nature itself, like cutting down the whole forest just for like production, and like killing off animals and ruining landscapes. We are really insensitive to the gift of nature that we are part of, and we try. Yeah, it's really interesting to like create a game and have the power to try to convey a different message, right? Like in Stray, if I remember correctly, there are no humans in Stray, not many. Like, there are robots and cats, of course, and it's a really interesting way of like reflecting on how we see the world from another lens, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, we have been living through the Anthropocene for too much time, I would say, where clearly the human is on top of the chain.
And we do it sometimes to ourselves, right? As well. If we look only at humans, we have sometimes really hard time seeing from another perspective, seeing the perspective of the poor and seeing the perspective of the rich. You know, if we go that deep to the only focus on the human aspect. But in this case, we are taking another step into looking from nature perspective, which is a really good thing to. Sometimes as humans, we need to see the world from a different angle, I think, to be able to respect the boundaries of others. I feel like that's my personal.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right, pointing that even the structures of power and hierarchies inside human life and human systems are clearly there. The differentiation is there, and we have already a lot of video games and all kind of media talking about that, the differences, right? And we see that even the way games are designed, the fact that in the past 20 years or more, we have discriminated certain minorities and gender, right? So we can clearly see that, and this was very clearly in ludic studies. But today the conversation is also beyond human, right? In the post-Anthropocene, which we are trying to make that transition. I believe our duty as game designers or people working in the field of games is to actually understand and try to make this knowledge, this awareness brought into practice, because we are all aware that the world is in danger. Humans are obviously in danger, but how do we do in our everyday life, in our everyday work, to actually put these things into practice. Yeah.
Mhm.
How do we operationalize this thinking? Because there are so many books about that, so many documentaries, so many pieces of news, and we keep being bombarded by that. So the question is, what are we doing to make the difference? So the CNAP is actually built on that, with that perspective. And also something I was not mentioning before, but it's not just about the contents. How can we change the contents of the games, but also
Yeah.
how can we change the process of design? Um, how can we optimize things? Thinking about ecology in this case, we tend to think about optimization in terms of time and cost, right?
Mhm.
But this time is about ecology as well. It's how can we produce games that respect in the environment, by using green and clean energy, uh, by using eventually less heavier algorithms, because obviously, as you know, most of video games we see today, they depend on a lot of resources, better GPUs, more energy, more electricity. So how can we do this in a balanced way? How can we use strategies eventually of carbon offset, if it's ethically correct? I mean, if it's not just for greenwashing, if it's actually a thing that brings transformation. And this is something we need to analyze, because there's a lot of strategies to, greenwash, and to make your company look good. But when you actually go into the details, things are a little bit more complex than they seem. And so that's one of our goals, is like how to transform, by watching practices that are already in place from the industry side as well. This is a conversation that has been ignited some years ago, but I think we will hear much more in the coming years. So yeah, that's another project, a very heavy one, which will consume a lot of time, but it's
Uh,
exciting.
I was wondering, you as a teacher at Noroff, and your main course is Ludic Studies, right? Like you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
In Ludic Studies, we just recently finished that class, and we learned a lot of things about like games and the philosophy and all that. You told us about two terms that are really stand out to a lot of gamers, and these two terms are flow and immersion. Which they are not really important in not just in games, right? They're also really important in life in general. Um, Casual gamers hear about this more so than other terms. Could you tell us a little bit about these, like, two specific terms and how they connect to our studies?
Sure. So flow is
Game
very.
designers.
What's that?
Just for the up and coming game designers and the first year that haven't been in Ludwig studies.
Sure. Um, so flow and immersion are normally very interconnected. Um, Immersion uh, doesn't mean necessarily that you're in a flow state. Um, but if you're in a flow state, if you're experiencing one, or if you have experienced one in the past, you might be deeply immersed into a situation or experience, right? So
Mhm.
the notion of flow is actually rooted in the research by Csikszentmihalyi, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, Hungarian uh, psychologist, and
Mhm.
and obviously the experience of flow became it was popularized by this gentleman, But we already intuitively say, well, I'm in the flow zone. Sometimes you don't even heard about Csikszentmihalyi, but you already use that expression, I'm in the flow zone, right? I
Like
keep
you're
hearing.
at like so invested, just listening to music, and you're just writing your reports or playing a game, or in like playing football with your friends, and like you're really in, like you go into this state of flow, right? So you get really locked in.
Absolutely. So, as you say, the flow state can be described as deep engrossment in an activity.
Mm-hmm.
When we read through the optimal experience, that famous book I was presenting during classes, you see some kind of diagrams showing the relationship between the skills you have and the difficulty of the situation. And the flow channel appears in between, right? When your skills match the difficulty of the situation. So, for example, when you start playing a game, let's call it Tetris, at the beginning, you have less skills, and the difficulty of the game is lower, right? It's an easier one because the speed is slower, and the kind of pieces the algorithm will generate will be more according to the needs. So the difficulty is not so high, but as soon as you start developing more skills, the difficulty also adapts. It's an adaptative difficulty, which happens in many games you've been playing, and I think it's something that, as you said, it's not just important to think in the field of games, but it's also something we see in our daily lives. Sometimes you're not playing a game; you might be just having a really interesting conversation with someone, and you might feel deeply immersed and engrossed in that conversation, and you might speak for hours with that person. Um, but also when you're reading a book, it's as simple as that. You're not playing, right? But there is something really engrossing when you read a really interesting novel. Even with Harry Potter, for example, I was deeply immersed reading those back in the days, and I think this is something we search, right? Not just in games, but in general in life. We have this will to be more engrossed, more immersed into situations, because they kind of bring a sort of optimal experience, a sort of um, feel good experience that that eventually what Csikszentmihalyi ends up saying is this brings more happiness. If you do more experiences that bring and trigger flow situations, you might end up being a more happier person because you feel good in what you're doing. Well, I think those are two important concepts, and when you open, manuals or theoretical accounts for games, for game design especially, you will always find references to flow and to immersion, because this is something we look when you're um, when you're looking to play, even when you're taking tube, returning from work at the end of the day, you're extremely tired, but you're playing. You're going to play because you want to be in a idle mode. You want to be detached. You want to have this space where you have almost like an automatic pilot. You're not
You're
thinking a lot, and you're blending uh, very well with the situation at hand. So this brings a feel good and relaxes you in a certain way. Although I have to say, um, again, going back to my previous thought about the books, this is something game designers and people in general are looking for, but we also need to be careful in a way that we can design situations that can be highly immersive, but they can also bring friction. And this is something we didn't explore so much because we didn't have time. There's a lot of conversations we needed to tackle during ludic studies. But I think this is something I would like to leave here as a reflection point, because some people will just say, well, we just want immersion. We just want to feel highly immersed. We want to feel good, and that's it. Don't talk to me about awareness. Don't talk to me about glitches and friction. But I would say that it is important to think about friction in the way that sometimes games could also create a moment of detachment from the game itself, from the situation itself, to be able to convey messages, to eventually stop you from playing, even because we have to acknowledge that these systems are highly addictive as well. This is one of the problems that come with games. So we cannot be naive and say like, "Well, games are something amazing," and they are. This is why we are here and we are talking today. They are, but they come with problems, as so many other things that are very good. Just think about burgers. Just think about chocolate.
It's about like how much consumption you can take, and if you take too much, like if you eat too many burgers. I love burgers, but if you eat too much of like hamburgers and like cheap meals and all that, you will not feel like you will not do well in the end. Like that's a fact. And the same goes with games. You can like escape from work and escape from life, but do you want to in general like totally escape from life? There's like you need to face your like problems, you need to face work, you need to face your stress at some point, and like acknowledge that you are a person in society. I would like in ludic studies there were numerous terms, and we discussed two of them right now. Psychological questions that got highlighted during courses as ludology, gamifying society, and the importance of play in our life. I got two questions for you. What is ludology and how does it tie into our life? Could you help us understand that a little better?
I mean, you also mentioned the Chinese social credit system, which kind of ties in with that a bit.
Yes. So, ludology can be, from my perspective, understood in two different senses. Sometimes ludology is addressed as the study of games, right? And even if you look into the etymology, I always like very much to when I see a new word, I immediately go to the etymological dictionary and I look immediately there because it tells us a lot about the root and about the history of that word as well. So and logi, so it's kind of connected with the logics, right? And ludos is connected with play and games, right? So immediately we could see that there is logia, which connects with study, with analysis. We could say that ludology is a field where we analyze and study games. Yeah. So it's exactly as I did for breaking down the word ludic studies, right? The ludic, it comes from ludere, right? It comes from Old Latin, and we could say that those those are too closely related, ludic and ludology. Um, some people call it game studies simply.
Yeah.
It's more it's more modern, but it still works. It's a huge field that tries to understand why people play, how they play, what motivates people to play, what are the impacts, different impacts at different levels of games and playful activities, right?
Mhm.
But then you also have a ludology in another context that very often appears in discussions around video games, which is that famous discussion on ludology versus narratology, right? Um, are games about narrative or are games about rules and mechanics? Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Um,
both.
or both. Yeah. I tend to say it's somewhere in the middle. But some people are really just claiming that games still follow the old literary um, model where you can use um, um, you can use all tools that you normally apply to books and to movies and,
Yeah.
and in order to analyze games. Others will say no. Games are about rules and mechanics, and
Mhm.
even without any spoken word, any kind of text, players will get the meaning of the game through those rules and mechanics. Okay, so that's another thing that is a huge discussion on the topic, and there was actually some. There is always Diego and Eric who try to analyze this discussion even very, but you have Gonzalo Frasca who was some years ago trying to break down this, but again. Different schools of thinking, and this is what ludic studies is about showing you different perspectives, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day I believe it's somewhere in the middle. You were also talking about mentioning the social credit system in China, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You want me to develop a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Good.
yeah, we talked, we kind of like wanted to know a bit about your perspective on gamifying society. So that's, yeah.
Right.
Is that the
um,
things that we should be scared about, Filipe? Or is it something we should practice more?
can you repeat the question, sorry?
Is that something we should be like scared about, like gamifying society, or is something that we should like put in more practice or like focus on gamifying
Right.
society?
Well, that's a very good question and important one, especially when you're designing games, right? Because at some point you will be in this process, right? Even when you design a game, you're participating indirectly in this kind of gamification. So I would say it's not about being scared. It's about being
Mm-hmm.
aware, right? It's
Yeah.
about knowing what is your impact at the end of the day. How is your game system, how is your contribution going to affect, and what are the ethical implications of
Mm-hmm.
your actions, basically. So for
Yeah.
instance, um, when the Chinese government tries to gamify life and society with a system of social credit score, as you
Mm-hmm.
had the opportunity to explore a little bit. I find it problematic. Yes,
Yeah.
I find it a problem because we are using systems that are extremely powerful, and we know that game systems. Um, and I know this because I've seen advertising using game mechanics and
Mm-hmm.
playfulness to engage and to get the attention from consumers, potential clients, which is already, which you might already contest and at least inquire, and you should. But the problem of this is always a question of resources, and at the end of the day, you will always be in situations where you need the money to live. You need to get you need to get a salary. So eventually, sometimes you won't have the choice. But as an independent game designer, if you are, or interaction designer, you may have the choice, and you might say, well, I prefer to work in another project that is not actually having this kind of dark impact onto people's life. In the case of China, right, where clearly you're getting points, rewards, and punishments by doing or not doing certain actions. So again, this is a terrible example of gamification. There are others. If we think about how Disney was using game systems as well to establish a scoreboard regarding your work and tasking time, how much time you take to perform a simple task, and obviously then creating a system of contest inside the workplace, which turn into a terrible nightmare for workers there. So again, I think we can see also the benefits. We can see lots of really interesting examples and very positive how games, since the beginning, they help us understanding things, they help us socializing, and gamifying educational experiences can be extremely interesting and rewarding. So again, I think it really depends on the project itself, and I think it's very bad to have this radical position of gamification is very bad, or to use Ian Bogost's expression, gamification is bullshit, right? This is what he wrote. I think it depends on the situation, and we need to be very nuanced always, and not create generalizations. Otherwise, it's there is no interest, and you're here. You are at the university to receive the skills of analyzing things properly, to develop a critical thinking, and not and to create your own view of things as well, your own arguments. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I think like gamifying things is like specifically for educational, like it's seen throughout like testing and research and all that. That's gamifying like education, like projects and for kids, and making them learn by playing, and that in that case gamifying a classroom has the potential of a really positive outcome, but when you are gamifying strictly, like really strictly, a whole society with like thousands of different perspectives and different beliefs, we can have on our hands a really dangerous ideology of like control, where we have seen in history what happens when that like is accomplished. Not all people believe in the same God, right? Or not all people believe in the same political aspect or the same economic beliefs, So I think it's just to keep an open mind and how we use this tool or phenomenon to our daily lives. That will be really interesting to see in future with the introduction of AI, which makes gamifying things a bit easier because we can allow AI to keep records of our behavior sometimes. And yeah, it's a quite fascinating topic that we can discuss in maybe future podcast episodes.
Yeah, a series of podcasts about
Yeah.
gamification that can be really, really interesting.
I was wondering about the element of play and how vital part it plays in our life. Could you tell us a bit about that? Because it's not about only like playing games, right? But a play is much more than that. It's almost a human behavior or a natural behavior that we all participate in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't want to deliver another class on ludic studies, because obviously, as you know, this is a question that might end up in several
Here's a
courses,
small pitch.
several lectures. But I would say that first of all, uh, I've been lucky enough to see my son growing. He's now a little bit more than 2 years old, and I can see how play is important to him, and to us altogether, because then at the end, play is also building this assemblage between um, sons and parents, and sons and parents, and friends of and parents of friends. So a huge assemblage and complex relationships. Um, so play is according to many theoreticians, this facilitator that allows you to learn and to navigate through space and reality, and discover yourself, and discover your body, and discover your psychological faculties as well.
Yeah.
So
Has
I think
your
that
has your research in play like changed a bit of how you raise your kid?
I think that's a very good question, Marcus. I think it did, in a sense that
That's a deep
again,
one.
yeah, it's a very, very important question, because I remember studying um, Steiner schools and their pedagogical model, with Montessori schools as well. And it's very particular, the way they teach, and the way they let children decide what they want to do, giving them some autonomy. And for example, the kind of toys they use are always built with the natural materials, um, and there is this openness, this capacity of saying, well, you are going to do this, you are going to use this toy, you are going to use this piece of wood, this building blocks, as you want, to be creative. So in my choices of, for example, buying toys, I'm always very interested in giving him tools that allow for self-expression. For example, so Legos and wood blocks, and building trains with the Brio brand, for example, are fundamental. And I tend to, for example, in the environment he has to play, it's quite minimalistic, in the sense that he has access to that, so he fully focuses on the play or the game at hand. So he's deeply immersed there.
Mhm.
And again, I think one of the main the big lessons as well was the fact that it's good to give them the liberty to do what they want to do, and not to say, well, this is what you should be doing, right? So for example, with the text of Ian Bogost about play and boredom, if you remember, Ian
Yeah.
Bogost talked a lot about this the fact that children live in a world that was not designed for them. And I keep seeing that, and I keep thinking about these words. They're very simple words, but very powerful words, in the sense that you always bring your kids, even when you're playing, to situations that you think it should be like that, and you do that unconsciously. You're not even thinking about it. But you learned, and people told you, no, it's like this. It should be like that. And obviously, I mean, it's a difficult threshold, isn't it? Because from one perspective, you want to educate, and you want to show possibilities, but on the other perspective, you're trying to bring your views and the views of society as well. And even when you're rushing your kids in the street because you want to do your stuff, right? You could stay with him in the street a little bit more time, but because you feel this pressure of, oh, I know I need to do stuff, I need to be there on time, and then obviously you are also changing the way that kid, that children is behaving. So again, to come back to play, I think openness and autonomy is key, and this is probably what I learned more from the things I've read, from the things I understood, and there are much more, but I think this will unfold now. Now he's in this age where he's saying the first words, and he's mixing Portuguese and French and English. So it's a very strange period, but very, very funny as well. But I think as he will grow, those things I've learned will become more and more relevant, I would say.
How do your courses help game developers? Could you give us a quick pitch on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I'm very concerned with giving gamers and future game developers a capacity to look into their previous experiences, capacity to develop critical thinking, and to question this system that is very natural for you, right? All these games, you've been playing them for a long time, and sometimes you just play them. You just want to go through them, to experience the best you can, and you're not giving the right framing to ask some questions about that game. So through your different assignments, you are asked about how that game, or how a particular game transformed the way you are, or transformed you somehow. So talking about the transformative power of play, how a certain game might be unethical, how a certain game might convey stereotypes. So rather than giving you technical skills, how to develop really beautiful generative NPCs or generative grass inside Unity, which you can, it's equally important, and I think all those things are important. I'm not saying that because I don't teach them, they are not important. But rather than going in that direction, I think it is important to consider those sociological, philosophical, aesthetical implications that you will be confronted with when you will be working later on. Because I know, and this connects with something I was saying at the beginning. When you're working, when you're in the professional life, you will rarely have the time to think about all these things. So it's better that you think about them right now, when you have a little bit more time, when your mind is open to receiving things. So later, your decisions, your design decisions, will be also informed by these questions you were bringing during Ludic Studies course. So that's it. I think it's a very short answer, but this is the basic thing.
Yeah.
If we like take a one step back, about from all this great academic, great education talk and philosophy and all that. Let me ask you some more simple questions to get to know you a little bit better. You told us you're from Portugal, right? You work in England and Norway, and you're also doing research in France. Have done research in France, so you know a lot of languages. Basically, you know where you are around. You know your way around the continent. Sorry about that. Are you multilingual, or like are you fluent in many languages? Would you say that?
Well, I would say I am, but then it's up to you to judge. Well, you know my English. It's the only thing you can judge. Obviously, with the Portuguese is my native language, right? I lived in Portugal until 26 years old, and the rest of my time I spent it in France, and the last 5 years in the UK. So obviously, my Portuguese, which goes worse and worse because I speak less and less Portuguese. It's still the language I'm more comfortable with, obviously.
Yeah.
All right. When I write, for example, fiction, it happens from time to time when I have the time. I like to write fiction. I write in Portuguese because English wouldn't work, and French is too complicated by writing.
Is it like
But
your mental thinking language? Is Portuguese?
it depends on the topic. For humor, it is a lot because I still have some jokes which sometimes I translate in English and it doesn't make any sense. Or French. It goes
Quite
as
a
well.
thing to get the hang of when you're learning a new language, isn't it?
Yeah.
Create humor.
It is the hardest thing
Yeah.
because you still have the humor from your native language.
Yeah.
All the jokes you learn, and even some kind of humor might be might work in a context, even in a region, even in a social group. Sometimes it's not even a question of country, but if you still make the same joke in the north of Portugal and the south, it still passes. But when
Yeah.
when you move to another culture, to another country, sometimes what you think it was funny, it's not. And
Question.
yeah, that's really hard.
Mhm.
But yeah, then French is, I would say that it's probably my second language.
Mhm.
Because orally, at least, I feel very comfortable with it. Because my family, I mean, my partner, she's French, and I've been speaking French every day since the last 10 years. So yeah, that has an impact as well.
Do you find it harder to learn new languages? Like, have you considered to learn Norwegian, Icelandic, Italian, or something?
Well,
Sweden?
it is difficult because at a certain age, I mean, I'm interested in so many things, and a new language is memory load, right?
Mm.
So you will have to make a huge effort in terms of remembering words, and I at some point I think I reached the limit.
Yeah.
I would have wanted to know more about Norwegian, for example, because it's one of the big issues for me. Going to Norway and always struggling with the basics. So
Mm.
so yeah, it's a big source of disappointment, personal disappointment, not knowing a little bit of Norwegian. But we never know because I really like Norway, and I keep telling this, and you see, well, one day I will live here. So if it happens, then I'm sure I will learn Norwegian, because I couldn't live in the country without knowing English. That's one thing I know for certain. But Icelandic, it might be harder. Even if, Iceland is a really interesting ecosystem as well. Well, and Italian problem then is Italian gets too close from Portuguese in a way. And when you have closer, because obviously Italian is rooted in Latin, as it is Spanish, French, Portuguese, and a part of Romanian. So the problem is some words get too close, and you don't know exactly if you're using the right word or not. So it becomes difficult. So to give you an example, when I learned French, when I started speaking fluently, my Spanish disappeared because I was able to speak a little bit of Spanish. I can fully understand Spanish if they speak slowly. But once you learn a new language, the other gets slightly replaced. So what happens to me today is when I start speaking Spanish, I use French words. I use certain French words, and I, automatically without thinking too much. But that's it.
I know from previous episodes that we have recorded that Diego is multilingual as well. He knows French, German, and like I don't know how many
Mexican?
languages. Yeah, he's always learning something new. But are there any other teachers at Noroff that know French, and do you talk to each other sometimes, like in that language, like behind Joshua's back because he's like from England?
Yeah, that's our code language with Eric Geslin and Diego, who speaks really good French as well. So from time to time we switch to French because obviously it's it feels good because it's very English. It's a very English ecosystem. Even if you look into the composition of teaching staff, you have South Africans who speak very, very good English as well. So it's kind of it's kind of a niche language, but from time to time it comes out, and it feels pleasant, especially when you are in an ecosystem where you cannot be understood. You feel a little bit special, I would say. But then very quickly when we need to talk about professional work, and then we switch to English.
And knowing that you have a co-host, you co-host many courses with different teachers. How is can you tell us a little bit, give us an insight on the teachers' chemistry and culture in like Noroff, at Noroff? Are you guys friends or are you just totally professional? Do you like hang out with Diego after work or talk to Joseph?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a really nice environment, and that's one of the good things of being in a small scale university and a small scale city as well. The fact that people always gather somehow. So each time I'm on campus, we organize different things. We go out, we drink, we play games.
Mm-hmm.
There is always at least one or two game nights, and yeah, I think this is one very precious things about NUC against other institutions I normally work for. I'm just thinking about Paris in SAD and LCC here in London. Big cities, people have lots of things to do. You see them during the meetings, you see them when you're teaching with them, and then they're gone because, family, because they need to reach the other side of London, which takes you an hour to go home. And it's true that this is very, very different. Again, sometimes we might feel, wow, big institutions, that's really nice, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of brilliant minds, really a lot of nice stuff, but socially speaking, it's not as easy. So yeah, it's the environment is definitely good, and I was co-teaching with Josh, for example, a couple of years ago, with Ludic Studies, with Eric Hammer, with Studio One. I think you were actually there. Was the first time I was co-teaching with Eric Hammer and Studio One. With Diego this year, I co-teach. I currently co-teach with Eric Geslin with interaction design, and it's always really interesting and a good exchange. We exchange perspectives, we exchange methodologies. So honestly, never had any problem. And this is not easy because, for example, I was teaching in the past at Parsons School of Design, and I had to teach with a friend, and sometimes we would disagree at certain points. And students would perceive this as, a lack of professionalism, because you're not aligned, you're disagreeing, and that raised a lot of questions because the direction told us, but you guys need to be aligned. But and that it brings a very important question: do we need to be aligned in everything? I mean, in most of the work, I mean, you need to be professional. The way you address, the way you communicate to each other and also to students. But sometimes it's really subjectivity coming into the foreground, right? It's your idea that is not your colleague's idea. And I think that there is a lot about maturity, because you see this in group work as well. Sometimes you don't agree and you're both right? And this stands exactly the same thing for teachers. Sometimes they don't agree with the perspective, but students, some of them, the more mature ones, they will understand that they will gain from that. They will take something out of that. But it's not always easy. But I think, and you see, because of the character of different teachers, they are easygoing. I think we are both more flexible. And even though if we disagree, it's very likely, and it's really pleasant to co-teach. Actually, I definitely think we should do that more and more, because there are interesting discussions that sometimes unfold. When you teach alone, you don't have that opportunity so much, because, as you know, some students are quite silent. I think that the key is that you need to learn from how the other approaches students, how the other sees a certain topic. So it's really just very good experience.
I heard from Joshua in the previous episode that the teachers often have like game nights, like playing board games and such. Have you ever like played board games with them?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how busy you are. Last time I was on campus, I was extremely busy with multiple things happening. But this is not a myth. Game nights exist, and they are very, very important for even for us to get to meet each other, because sometimes Yeah.
Joshua said he's the greatest board game player at campus. So I was like, let me ask Filipe. I'm a bit unsure.
I'm not. I think he was talking about himself, and he's a very very good player, Josh. I think he lives that. Um, I don't play as much as I wanted. I think my professional life, the fact that I'm always traveling from place to place also prevents me from playing as much as I wanted. But what I can say is Josh and Eric Hammer and Diego, they are excellent players. Very hard to compete with them. And we always have a lot of fun, even if I'm far from being at the same level than them. I do what I really like to do as well is sometimes when you have very complex board games, and clearly I would have to read an entire manual just to be able to do the basics. What I do is I sit and I observe, because I learn a lot from observing people playing, behind the shoulder, sitting and just feeling that magic circle in front of me. And I'm in that position where I'm inside, but I'm at the outside at the same time, and I'm able to observe that ecosystem, and that is extremely precious. So it's something I invite you to do. Sometimes just observe how this thing unfolds, because you learn a lot about not just the game itself, not just about the play and that experience, but also about people. Yeah, because when people play, they transform themselves. They become another. I'm not trying to send any kind of message here.
We're gonna ask all the students to come over to the game nights and watch as they play in a circle.
Yeah, that's something I would definitely invite you to do, because observation in game is something really interesting and fascinating. How people transform themselves, how people behave in a different way, and there's a lot that comes out without you noticing, because you're so fully engrossed normally that you're not even aware of what you're saying, or and that is really rich. So yeah, game nights are a thing, and hopefully one day we will have the privilege to share one with some of you.
Yeah.
So yeah, the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
This end of the. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. This has been the unofficial Noroff podcast of the Interactive Media Games Department, or just the unofficial Noroff podcast. I'm Trusty.
I'm Marcus.
I'm
Filipe.
And thank you, Filipe, to spend the time with us.
That was a pleasure. I hope this continues, and
we'll have some more specified questions about certain topics next time.
Absolutely, I'm in.